All right, welcome back. This is Jason Shadrick with the Chasing Frets podcast, and I'm here once again with Joe Gore.
Hi, really happy to be here, Jason.
And we're back again with Will Bernard. On Monday, we talked about the ups and downs and the pros and cons of reading music and the kind of gigs that maybe that skill could help you land. And this week, we're going to talk about playing and improvising within a trio context. One of the groups Will plays with now is the Stanton Moore Trio. Stanton's a great drummer from New Orleans, and it's Will, Stanton, and Robert Walter usually on organ. And it's such a cool, funky, hip, kind of modern, almost with definite rock edge to it.
And if you don't happen to know Stanton Moore's work, among drummers, he's a real drummer's drummer.
Yeah.
Ask your drummer friends, you'll see.
I mean, probably the leading authority on the history and tradition of New Orleans drumming. I mean,
probably so, yeah. Yeah.
It's hard, even just watching him play or listening to him play, it's hard to just sit still. It's so infectiously groovy, and Will complements that really, really nice. So
yeah. Two deep players there.
Yeah, and so today we're gonna talk about that. Make sure to rate and review our podcast on iTunes or wherever else you are listening to this. And if you want to reach out and say hi, hit us up at chasingfrets@premierguitar.com. If you want to reach out and either suggest a guest, suggest a topic, question for Andy, Joe, or I. But you can reach us there. So we're going to get
just don't make fun of our speaking voices.
Yeah. So we're going to get right to it. And so here's us talking with Will Bernard. We are back again with my good buddy Joe Gore.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jason.
And our new friend here, Will Bernard. How you doing, Will?
Hey, guys.
Our new old friend, I should say. I know you and Joe go back quite a ways.
Will is hunkered down in Brooklyn, which is his second home base.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
today, I'm really excited to talk to you about this subject, Will, is about playing in a trio format. It seems like that's a format where you really, some of my favorite Will Bernard records are you in trio. And sometimes that's with a bass player, sometimes that's with an organ player and drums. Mm-hmm. And the first question I kind of wanted to pitch you is, what are some of your favorite guitar trios that you kind of think about that were especially formative in your upbringing?
Oh, wow. Well, I remember there was a Jim Hall record, I think Jim Hall Live, is it?
Yep. Mm-hmm. The with the Canadian rhythm section. I'm blanking on the
Canadian rhythm section that
yep.
I really enjoyed when I was 15 or something. There was a certain kind of freedom about it that I liked, where he was wasn't trying to fill up all the holes everywhere, and just kind of letting it breathe more. And I think that a lot of guitar players were inspired by his work, at that time in the trio format. Like I think of Frizzell, and some guys like that.
I mean, even younger. I know even younger players like Julian Lage have pointed to that record, and as a real touchstone. Was like the early Pat Martino organ, like El Hombre. Was that ever?
Yeah, the Pat Martino one I loved so much was Consciousness. That was a quartet. But some West records, the organ trio records.
Yeah.
I didn't play a lot of trio. I mean, trio by necessity, but I wasn't trying to play in a lot of trios until maybe when I started playing organ trios, And of course, we're talking about the Stanton Moore Trio with Robert Walter, which is, I learned quite a bit about playing in trios with that group, organ trios.
For example?
Stan's trio was, I think one of the things that's most interesting about that context was it was ostensibly a jazz organ trio, but we're taking more of a rock approach to it, and playing in rock clubs. And, kind of going back to the Brian Auger trio, I think was, there weren't that many groups that did that, like Tony Williams' Lifetime, I guess, too, with
Yeah.
Larry Young, taking the organ trio to a rock audience. So we were writing music, with that in mind. Some of our references were not, obviously the meters were big focal point, but also, like Led Zeppelin and AC/DC and, there's stuff that we would do. We would actually do covers, some of those bands.
Well, didn't you guys do a cover of When the Levee Breaks?
Yeah, we did that one, yeah. And that's very much about what Stanton does, is like incorporate New Orleans and other kinds of drum styles into more of a rock context. So then from there I started, I didn't think of myself as that kind of guitar player, but I ended up playing with lots of organ players. Got to play with Lonnie Smith. And,
wow.
Played a bunch of gigs with Lonnie and Will Blades, and I had a trio for a while. And then like now all of a sudden I'm the organ guy, I played with a lot of organ players here in New York.
So how do you approach playing with an organ trio, whether it be Will or Dr. Lonnie, to a more traditional, like was on that Jim Hall record where you have a bass player and a drummer? Mm-hmm. Are there certain things, obviously stylistic things, whether it's more rocking like Stanton or maybe it could be more swinging and funky like Dr. Lonnie, but are there kind of things you have in mind going into a situation of how you need to play or how aggressive maybe you need to be?
One of the things about playing organ trio is that the organist is playing the bass at the same time they're playing the melodic material in the right hand. So they're playing bass with their left hand mostly, and then also their feet on the pedals. So sometimes there's this whole area in the middle that's left open for a guitar player, that works sonically in the mid-range area, which I think is one of the reasons why it works so well. So
mm-hmm.
like if, for instance, as an organ player is soloing, you have a lot of room to comp behind him or her. You can help shape a solo or help shape the harmonic content, move it in different directions. That's one of the things I really enjoy about that. There's a certain freedom, like compared to playing in a group with a piano player and a bass player. A lot of piano players take up a lot of room all over the keyboard. Whereas if you play with a bass, I was thinking about this earlier, either acoustic or electric bass trio, it's a whole nother thing, and it's great in a kind of in a listening context like jazz. There's a lot more freedom, can really go all over the place. In fact, I just recorded another record with Ches Smith. I did a record with Ches Smith and Devin Hoff years ago, which was one of my favorite records. And it's more sort of on the avant edge, than what I usually do. Mm-hmm. And I have another one in the can with a trio, with the Chris Lightcap this time. So it's another side of me I'm trying to develop, But I find it easier to play, like I was saying before, in a rock club with an organ.
Do you write differently for those type of trios between organ and bass? How would you approach that from a compositional standpoint?
A lot of my jazz listening is more adventurous. I was really influenced by Ornette Coleman and that approach to jazz where there's not really set harmonies. And I feel very comfortable playing in that way. And it's easier to do that with a bass player, So I'll write more open kind of harmonic material usually in that case.
Because it seems like just obviously the timbre of the organ is just it's a heavier thing. Like when they lean into a chord or even just a double stop or something, that takes up a lot of weight in the sound of a band.
Yeah, and I never thought of it the way, because we've sort of framed this question as playing with a trio of guitar, bass, and drums as opposed to playing in a trio of guitar, organ, and drums. And Will pointed out something that seems obvious now, but I'd never actually thought about that, about the relative amount of space consumed by organs and piano. Of course, the organ can potentially have a gigantic sound, but by its nature, it's split into multiple manuals. Almost by its nature, the player is going to be playing in at least two very clearly differentiated registers, possibly with a very different sound. And the idea of it, the right hand up here and the left hand, way on the floor, far to the left, it kind of makes a very inviting couple of slices of bread for a guitar sandwich.
Yeah, that's true. Although good organ player can just take over the whole room, obviously, pull out all the stops and, just make a huge sound. And all of a sudden you're just kind of dwarfed.
I was also interested in something you said a few minutes ago when you were talking about improvising with organists, and you mentioned how you could have a hand in influencing, say, the course of the organist solo, by interjecting harmonic content. And, the immediate thing that I thought of is, how do you guarantee that it's desired harmonic content? I mean, between adding elements to the mix that are a basis for the organist's inspiration versus getting too aggressive with setting the harmonic agenda yourself.
Well, yeah, that's a taste thing, obviously, and hopefully you find people that you have similar taste and you can have similar knowledge of harmony that works together. One of the guys I've been playing with a lot over the years and more lately is John Medeski, who's become a good friend, and we have a group called Mad Skillet that we've been playing with over the last few years. And we do organ trios, and he's like way more advanced. He's more like a Larry Young. I mean, he's played a lot of free jazz and worked with John Zorn and people like this, so we can go off into all kinds of crazy stuff together. But I was going to mention him in the previous thing too as a reader, because he's a reader, more of a reader than a lot of people I play with. So, and we have a very similar, like we both went to music school and we're fascinated by 20th century music and third stream composers, and we can reference a lot of different, more than most musicians I play with. We can talk about Elliott Carter and then talk about James Booker and Allman Brothers and Pixies or whatever.
Can you explain the term third stream for folks who might not know it?
There was a group of composers that were involved with the school, the New England Conservatory of Music, where actually John Medeski went, and a lot of my friends that I work with here. And the idea is to combine classical music and jazz music techniques. So people like George Russell and I guess Gil Evans he's not necessarily thought of as that third stream maybe, but he would be in that world. Gunther Schuller. You can write, bring in jazz techniques into maybe an orchestra or the other way around, and combine, this is kind of me, what I've always been into, although maybe not developed it as much as I'd like to, but it's part of what I enjoy.
To kind of wrap this episode up, Will, if you could point our listeners to a couple of trio records in your catalog, where would you want them to check out? Because some of your stuff isn't necessarily under your name.
Right. Well, there's two trio records I've done. One is called Directions to My House, and one is called Outdoor Living. Directions to My House was with the acoustic bass, and Outdoor Living was organ. And then I've done 3 records with Stanton Moore Trio, and a couple of records with Brian Charette, an organist here in New York. And actually, I have I recorded a new record with Sam Yahel and Donald Edwards. Sam Yahel's an organist here in New York, which has not been mixed or completed yet. Should come out at some point.
All right. Well, everybody make sure to check out Will's latest record, Freelance Subversive. And we will have him back yet again later this week for another episode. So thanks again, Joe. Thanks again, Will. And we'll talk to everybody soon.